The Forbidden Forest and the Sleeping Tree. John's ship was broken. Smoke rose from the engine. Sparks flew from the control panel. He pressed buttons, but nothing worked. The small spaceship shook once more and crashed into the soft green trees of an alien planet. Silence followed. John opened his eyes. His head hurt. He was alive, but his ship was ruined. He stepped outside. The air was warm. Strange birds flew in the sky, and the trees around him were tall, glowing slightly with green light. It was quiet, too quiet. John was a lone explorer. He had been looking for a new world, but now he was stuck on this one. He sent out a signal for help, but he knew it could take weeks or months for anyone to find him. He needed food, water, shelter. As he walked deeper into the forest, he noticed something strange. The trees grew taller, wider, and older. Some had silver bark. The leaves shimmered like stars. But the deeper he went, the colder it became. The wind whispered, as if it carried voices. The local people, before his crash, had warned him. They called this place the Forbidden Forest. They said no one who went inside ever came back. John didn't believe in ghost stories. He thought maybe there were wild animals or dangerous plants. But now, walking through the misty woods, even he felt a chill. Then he saw it. A tree stood in the center of a wide clearing. It was huge, taller than any building he had seen. Its bark was silver and gold, twisted like ropes. At the base of the tree, vines curled like fingers. Its branches looked like arms reaching for the sky. And on the front of the tree was a face. John stepped closer. The face was carved into the tree, but not by tools. It looked like it had grown from the bark itself. It was a woman's face, eyes closed, lips calm, like she was sleeping. Her hair was made of wooden strands that blended into the branches. He felt something pull him forward. His chest felt heavy. His hand moved on its own. He reached out and touched the tree. The bark was warm. Suddenly, the tree began to glow. A golden light spread from his fingers, racing up the trunk and into the branches. The vines at the base began to shake. Leaves fell from the sky like slow rain. The air filled with soft sounds, like music, like a heartbeat. Then, the bark split open. John jumped back as the front of the tree opened like a door. From inside, a body fell forward. It was a woman. She collapsed into John's arms. Her skin glowed faintly. Her hair was long, green like leaves. Her dress was made of soft, golden cloth. Her body was warm, but her eyes were closed. He laid her gently on the ground. Who was she? Was she alive? John touched her wrist. A pulse. She was breathing. He was about to speak, when her eyes slowly opened. They were bright silver. Her gaze was deep, like she could see into his soul. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she whispered one word. Human. John's mouth opened. Yes, I'm a human. Tears formed in her eyes. She tried to sit up but fell back. How long? She asked. I don't know what you mean, John said. Who are you? What is this place? She looked up at the glowing tree. I was sleeping. For a long time, she whispered, waiting for the one whose touch could break the curse. A curse? John asked, confused. She nodded weakly. I was trapped here during the war. They sealed me inside to stop my light. John shook his head. I don't understand. What war? There's no war now. Her eyes widened. Then, it's over. Is the world safe? Are the humans back? I'm the only one here, he said, and I don't think there are other humans on this planet. She looked terrified. No, if I am free, they will come. They will feel it. They will try to lock me away again. John stood, looking around. Who will come? She looked at him, voice shaking. The Nightborn. The ones who cursed me. If they know I'm awake, They will come to finish what they started. Suddenly, the trees around them rustled. A low growl echoed in the distance. John turned quickly. The forest felt darker now. The woman clutched his arm. "We have to go. Now." John looked at her. "You can barely stand." "You woke me," she said. "You broke the seal. That means you are not ordinary. There is something inside you, something they fear." He helped her to her feet. Leaves blew in circles. The wind grew cold. And in the shadows of the forest, glowing red eyes appeared, watching them. She remembers the war, and him. John held the strange woman tightly as she leaned against him, her legs shaking. Her skin still glowed faintly, like moonlight hidden behind thin clouds. The red eyes in the forest slowly disappeared, but the fear in her silver eyes did not fade. "They didn't attack," John whispered. "They just watched us." The woman nodded weakly. "They're not ready yet, but they know I'm free now. They will gather more. They always do." John helped her walk through the forest. He had no idea where he was going, but he didn't want to stay near that glowing tree anymore. Something about it. It felt alive, like it was still watching them. And somehow it felt like it remembered. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Just weak," she whispered. "I have not moved, not breathed freely, in so long. The curse took everything from me, even time." John paused under a large arch of thick vines. The light around them was growing dim as the sky above darkened. "Can you tell me who you are now?" The woman turned to him. "My name is Elira. I was once a guardian of the light trees. This forest, what's left of it, was our sacred place, until the war came." John blinked. "War? What war?" Elira looked surprised. "You don't know. You don't remember anything." "I'm just an explorer," John said. "I came here by accident. My ship crashed." She touched his face gently, her fingers soft and cold. "But you look exactly like him." "Like who?" She looked away. "There was a human, a long time ago. He fought beside us during the First War. He stood against the Nightborn when all others ran. He gave his life to protect this forest, and to save me. Before the curse sealed me in the tree, I saw his face one last time." Her voice lowered, almost like a song. "He touched the tree, just like you. He promised he would return one day. His eyes, his voice, it was just like yours." John frowned. "You're saying I look like someone from thousands of years ago?" "Yes," she whispered. "Exactly like him. But that's impossible, right?" John didn't answer. They moved deeper into the woods until they found a small cave behind a waterfall. John checked it carefully. It was empty, dry, and hidden. He helped Elira inside, then lit a small light from his emergency pack. A soft orange glow filled the space. She sat down and closed her eyes for a moment, then slowly opened them again. "The Nightborn are not from this world. They are made of shadow and silence. Long ago, they came through the rift in the sky, bringing fear and darkness. They hated the light. They wanted to destroy every tree of life." "Like the one you were trapped in?" John asked. "Yes," she nodded. "Each tree was connected to the planet's heart. We were its protectors. But when the Nightborn came, they poisoned the roots. One by one, the trees died. And you. They could not kill me," Elira said. "So they cursed me, locked me inside the last living tree, hoping time would forget me." John sat beside her. "But it didn't. I found you." She smiled softly. "Yes, you broke the curse with your touch. Only one with light in his soul could do that. The ancient humans had it, but I thought all of them were gone." John looked down at his hands. "I'm just a normal guy. I don't have any special light." Elira leaned close. "Then how did you wake me?" Before he could answer, a deep sound echoed from the forest again, like thunder, but longer, like a roar far away. Elira's body tensed. "They're calling the others. How many of them are there? Too many, she said, but they don't know yet that your light is growing. What does that mean? She placed her hand on his chest. Your body is reacting to mine. My light is returning. And it's waking something inside you too. John felt warmth spreading through his chest. His heart beat faster. What's happening to me? You carry something ancient, she said. A spark left by the first humans. The ones who stood against the dark. Maybe you are the last of them. Or maybe you are him. Reborn. That's not possible, John whispered. She tilted her head. In this world, even time breaks. They both sat in silence for a while. Outside the cave, the wind howled. The forest creaked. And far away, something moved, slow and heavy. Elira looked at John. If they find us now, we won't survive. Not like this. But there is one place where we might find answers. Where? The ruins of Lumera, she said. That's where the last battle happened. That's where he, your twin, your ancestor, your past, left something for me. A promise. John stood up. Then let's go. You'll need to be ready, Elira said. The journey will not be easy. But once we reach it, you may finally understand why you were the one who woke me. John looked at the entrance of the cave. The light from his lamp flickered for a second, then steadied. I don't know what I am, he said softly. But if they're coming for you, they'll have to go through me first. Elira smiled again. For the first time in thousands of years, the guardian of the trees was no longer alone. The hunters in the dark. The forest no longer felt quiet. As night fell, a strange darkness settled across the trees, not just the absence of light, but a living shadow that moved between the leaves like it was watching. The wind didn't blow. The birds didn't sing. Even the insects stopped buzzing. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Inside the small cave behind the waterfall, John sat with Elira, watching the entrance carefully. His flashlight flickered again. Not because the battery was dying, but because something outside was interfering with it. Elira slowly opened her eyes. She had been resting, but her face looked tense, alert. They're near. John looked at her. How can you tell? I can feel them, she said. The Nightborn never travel alone. One may watch, while 10 more surround you. John swallowed hard. He tightened the grip on his tool knife. It wasn't a real weapon, but it was all he had. Elira tried to stand but stumbled. John rushed to catch her. You're still weak, he said. She shook her head. It's not just weakness. The tree gave me life again, but it also connected me to the forest. The Nightborn poison it. Their darkness makes me sick. John helped her sit. So what do we do? Stay here and wait for them. Elira looked at him, her silver eyes serious. No, we have to move. If we stay in one place too long, they'll trap us. John nodded. Then we leave now. They packed quickly, what little they had, and stepped out of the cave. The waterfall behind them still flowed, but now the water glowed faintly blue, like it was reacting to Elira's presence. As they moved through the forest, the trees seemed to lean closer, their long branches brushing against John's arms. Every sound felt louder. Every shadow looked alive. Elira stopped suddenly. Her hand reached out to stop John. He looked at her. What is it? She didn't speak. She simply pointed. There, in the middle of the path, stood a creature. It was tall, almost human-shaped, but made entirely of black smoke. 2 glowing red eyes shined from its face, and long claws reached down past its knees. The air around it shimmered with cold. John took a step back. Is that a Nightborn? Elira nodded slowly. A scout. The creature didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood. Then, in a voice that didn't come from its mouth, but echoed inside their minds, it spoke. She is awake. Elira tensed. The creature's head tilted. You are not the one who sealed her. But you broke the lock. You carry the light." John stepped forward, trying to hide his fear. "Stay away from her." The creature didn't move, but around them, the forest rustled. More red eyes appeared between the trees. 1, 2, 5, 10. More. They were surrounded. Elira gripped John's hand. "Don't let go." Before he could respond, she raised her other hand, and the air exploded with light. A blinding wave of energy burst from her palm, lighting up the forest like a sunrise. The Nightborn screamed, not with voices, but with shrieks that shook the trees. Some of them vanished instantly, others melted into shadows, but more kept coming. John pulled Elira as they ran through the glowing trees. The forest twisted around them. Vines fell from above, roots lifted from the ground, but somehow the forest didn't slow them. It protected them. "Elira," John shouted, "where are we going?" "There's a hidden path," she said. "The trees remember me." As they ran, the red eyes faded behind them, but the danger didn't disappear. The forest was changing. The trees grew older, larger. Strange symbols glowed on their bark. Some looked like stars, others like languages John couldn't read. Suddenly, they'd reached a wide open space. In the center was a stone structure, ancient, cracked, and covered in moss. "The ruins," the Lara whispered. "We found them." John looked around. This was a city. "A temple," she said. "A place of memory." They entered the ruins. The air inside was cold, but peaceful. A large stone stood at the center of the room. And on that stone was something carved. John walked closer. It was a human face. His face. He froze. "What is this?" Elira stared in silence. Her hands trembled. He was real. You are him." "No," John said. "This must be some kind of mistake." She pointed at the bottom of the carving. Words were written there, in a language John somehow understood. "When the tree sleeps, I will sleep. When the tree wakes, I will return." John stepped back. "I don't remember any of this." Elira stepped closer to him. "Your memories may be lost, but your soul remembers. That's why the tree chose you." Before John could speak, a sound echoed outside. Not footsteps. Wings. Dozens of creatures flew overhead. Black shapes, silent and fast. The Lyra's voice trembled. "The Nightborn have grown stronger. They don't hide anymore. They are preparing for war." John looked down at the carved stone, his own face staring back at him from the past. He clenched his fists. "I don't know who I was," he said, "but I know who I am now, and I won't let them take you." A low voice filled the ruins. "You already belong to us." The floor beneath them cracked, and from the shadows, something enormous began to rise. A hero forgotten by time. The ground trembled. John grabbed Elira as the ancient floor beneath them cracked like ice under pressure. Dust fell from the ceiling of the ruined temple. Old roots shook loose from the walls. A deep hum filled the air, like a voice that had no mouth but still wanted to speak. "You already belong to us." That voice again. John turned around, but saw nothing in the shadows. Still, the words echoed inside his mind. Heavy, cold, and strangely familiar. Elira held onto his arm, breathing fast. That voice, it belongs to one of the generals, a Nightborn named Kale. He was once human. John blinked. "Wait, what?" "One of them was human." She nodded, her voice shaking. "A long time ago, before the fall, he gave up his body to the shadows, hoping for power, for immortality. And now, he leads the ones who cursed me." The stone beneath their feet split open. From the center rose a tall black figure, twice John's height, his body made of both armor and smoke. His face was hidden behind a metal mask, but glowing red eyes burned through the slits. Around his neck hung an old human tag. John stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Are you Kal?" The figure didn't answer with words. He raised one hand, and shadows swirled toward Elira like vines. John reacted instantly, pushing Elira behind him. The shadows hit John's chest and stopped. A bright pulse exploded from inside him, throwing the shadow vines backward. The creature staggered. Smoke hissed where the light had touched him. Kale growled, finally speaking. "So, the light still lives. In you, just like before." John stood still, heart pounding. "I don't remember you." "You will," Kale said. "Soon." Suddenly, the ground cracked harder, and the figure melted back into the stone, like he was never there. The temple grew silent again. Elira grabbed John's hand. "Come. There's something you need to see." She led him through a side tunnel lit by soft blue moss on the walls. It felt like the ruins were breathing, alive in some ancient, tired way. Finally, they entered a chamber with smooth white stone, untouched by time. At the center was a pedestal, and on it sat a small metallic cube glowing with faint light. John stepped closer. "What is it?" Elira looked at him. "Your past." He reached out and touched the cube. Suddenly, the room disappeared. Nem inomoroi vizion. John stood in the same chamber, but it was no longer a ruin. Now it was alive. Bright, clean. Lights glowed from walls, and symbols floated in the air. And there, across the room, stood a man. He wore armor that shimmered with golden energy. A long scar crossed his cheek. He looked tired, like he had fought for too long. John's heart stopped. The man looked exactly like him. The vision John turned to face the memory recorder. He spoke slowly, carefully. "If you're watching this, then the curse has finally broken. That means Elira is free. That means the war is starting again. I was the last of the Lightbearers. The others died defending the trees. I chose to stay behind, to seal her away, to keep her safe. But I also left something behind. You. You may be a copy, a descendant, a spark of what I was. But you are also something new. The world doesn't need the old me. It needs you now. Protect her. Find the heart tree. And whatever happens, don't let the darkness use your name." The vision faded. John opened his eyes. The chamber returned. He was shaking. Elira placed a hand on his shoulder. "You saw him, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. "I don't know how, but that was me." Elira smiled gently. "No, that was you. But now you are something else. Someone else." John backed away from the cube. "I'm not ready for this. I came here by accident. I don't know how to fight a war. I'm not a hero." Elira stepped in front of him. Neither was he. Not at first. He chose to fight. "So can you." John looked at his hands. They were glowing faintly now, just like in the vision. "What's happening to me?" he asked. "You're awakening," Elira said. "The light inside you is no longer sleeping. And the Nightborn know that. That's why Kale came. He fears you." John's voice was quiet. "Then we don't have much time, do we?" "No," she said. "They will come with full force. We must go to the heart tree before they do. If we can awaken it, its power may stop them. But won't they know we're heading there?" "They already do," Elira whispered. John nodded. "Then let them come." Suddenly, the entrance to the chamber rumbled. Dust fell again from the ceiling. This time, it wasn't a vision. It was real. Outside, the sky grew red. Thunder cracked, but not from clouds. Ships were descending. Strange black ships with red markings, like claws, like scars across the sky. Elira's face paled. "Those aren't just Nightborn. They have help now." "From who?" John asked. She whispered two words. "Other worlds." The return of the enemy. The sky burned red. John stood on the highest stone of the ancient ruins, staring upward. Dozens of ships were descending through the clouds, black, sharp, and alien. They moved in silence, without any engines, like dark birds floating on an invisible wind. Each ship had red symbols carved across its hull, jagged, chaotic marks that looked more like wounds than letters. Beside him, Illyra's body trembled, not from fear, but from deep, ancient anger. "They were never supposed to return," she whispered. "These ships belong to the Void Pact. They served the Nightborn during the First War. But we defeated them. Or so we thought." John clenched his fists. "So the Nightborn have allies?" "Yes," Illyra said, voice cold. "And they bring death with them." The largest ship landed near the edge of the ruins, shaking the ground. A ramp hissed open. Smoke poured out, and from the shadows stepped a figure taller than any human John had ever seen. Metal armor covered his body, dark and cracked like volcanic stone. A long red cloak flowed behind him. His face was hidden under a helmet, but his voice, when he spoke, cut through the air like a blade. "Illyra, you should not be walking." John stepped forward. "Kale." The figure stopped. "You remember me now." "I don't," John said, "but I know enough. You were human once. What happened to you?" Kale tilted his head. "I survived. That's more than I can say for the others." His voice echoed, not just from his mouth, but inside their minds, like a thought forced into the skull. "You left your people," Illyra said. "You gave your soul to the dark." "I gave it for power," Kale replied. "And I was right. Look at you, trapped in trees, hiding in ruins. My kind rules the skies now." John looked around. More Nightborn soldiers began surrounding the ruins, stepping out from the shadows like living smoke. Some had red glowing blades. Others held staffs that pulsed with black energy. "Why now?" John asked. "Why come back after all this time?" Kale took another step forward. "Because you woke her. And now the old light stirs again. You think you can stop what we've built. You think your half-forgotten powers will protect you." John's voice stayed calm. "We're not running." Kale chuckled, a dry, bitter sound. "Then die like the others." He raised one hand, and the Nightborn charged. John pulled Illyra back behind the ruins. "Stay down." He ducked behind a broken wall, breathing hard. He didn't have real weapons, just a survival knife, a broken energy pistol, and whatever strange power was waking inside him. Illyra pressed her hand to his chest. "Let me help." A golden light passed from her into him. His heart began to race, not from fear, but from energy. His skin lit up, lines of glowing white running down his arms like veins of fire. He stood up. The first Nightborn lunged at him with a blade, but John moved faster than he ever had before. His hand shot forward, grabbing the creature's arm. Light burst from his palm, burning through the shadow like fire through paper. The Nightborn screamed and vanished. John gasped. "What was that?" Illyra smiled weakly. "Your light finally woke up." The others came fast, blades swinging, claws ready, but John was no longer running. He moved through them like a storm, each strike of his hand sending waves of light that shattered their dark bodies. But Kale did not move. He simply watched. After 10 of his warriors fell, Kale stepped forward. "I see," he said slowly. "You really are him. Or what's left of him." John raised his fists, glowing with golden light. "You want her. Come take her." Kale removed his helmet. His face was pale, stretched, and marked with black scars. His eyes were no longer human. They glowed red like burning coals. But behind them was pain, rage, and something else. Recognition. "I warned you once," Kale said. "When you sealed her away, I told you what would happen. But you chose her. You always chose her." John's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Kale pointed at Illyra. "You don't remember, but you were supposed to join us. You were one of us, until she pulled you away." Illyra stepped forward. "Lies." "Is it?" Kale whispered. He stood at the edge of the abyss. He looked into the dark. He was seconds from accepting it. But you changed his heart. John shook his head. Even if that's true, I know who I am now. I'm not you. Cale smiled sadly. We'll see. He raised both hands, and the ground split open. From beneath the ruins, a massive shadow rose, larger than anything John had seen. It wasn't a creature. It was a machine. A weapon. The Nightborn Warforged Titan, left sleeping since the old war. Its eyes glowed red. Cal's voice thundered. I brought an army. But for you, old friend, this will be enough. Elira's voice broke the silence. John, we have to reach the heart tree. Now. John stared at the giant machine. If we run, it'll follow. I know, she said, but there's something there waiting for you, something that can stop him. John looked at the glowing lines on his arms, at Elira, at the broken sky above, and he made his choice. Then let's end this. The light he carries. The sky screamed as the Warforged Titan rose. Its metal body, powered by shadow, moved like thunder across the ruined earth. Each step cracked ancient stone. Black mist leaked from its joints, and its red eyes locked onto John, as if it had waited centuries just to find him. John ran. Not away, forward. Elira moved beside him, her feet barely touching the ground. Even in her weakened state, the forest bent for her, letting them pass. Vines pulled back, branches curved overhead like shields. The forest remembered her. Behind them, the Titan's roar shook the trees. Cale didn't follow yet. He stood near the ruins, watching, his red eyes glowing in the dark, like a shadow with patience. He's testing us, Elira said as they moved. He wants to see if you'll run or rise. John didn't speak. His legs moved faster than they should have. His heart pounded, but it wasn't just fear. It was the light. It was awake now. Fully. And it wasn't quiet anymore. It was calling him. Inside his chest, it pulsed like a second heartbeat, and it whispered one word again and again. Home. They reached the edge of a cliff. Below, deep within a valley filled with silver mist and glowing rivers, stood a tree unlike any other. It was not made of wood. Its trunk shimmered like crystal. Its branches lit up the sky like stars. Roots as wide as rivers spread across the valley floor, and its leaves changed color with every breath of wind. Elira fell to her knees. The heart tree, she whispered. John stared. He had seen powerful things. He had survived space storms, alien cities, even monsters. But nothing had ever made him feel this small. He helped Elira stand, and they began the slow walk down into the valley. With each step, John felt the pull grow stronger. Images danced in his mind. Memories that weren't his, or maybe ones that used to be. A battle, a promise, a tear on her cheek, a kiss before silence. He shook his head. I don't know what's real anymore. Elira looked at him softly. Both are. They reached the base of the heart tree. Its roots formed natural steps, leading to a glowing doorway in its trunk. No guards, no locks. It opened for them like it had been waiting all this time. Inside, everything was light. The walls pulsed with slow golden energy. Symbols floated in the air. Some were ancient languages. Others looked like memories turned into color. At the center of the chamber stood a mirror of living light. It didn't reflect John's body. It reflected something else. A figure in golden armor, eyes full of pain and strength. A warrior, a guardian, a man who once sealed away his own love to protect her. Elira stood beside John. He loved me once, she whispered. And now, maybe he still does. Or maybe he's become something new. John stepped closer to the mirror. The figure inside moved with him. He touched it. The world exploded in light. Inside the heart, John floated in a space made of memories and stars. Voices spoke without mouths. Light sang without sound. He saw fragments of himself, a child lost on Earth, a young man training alone in space, a crash, a tree, a face he didn't know but somehow loved. Then he saw the truth. He wasn't just a human explorer. He was a living vessel. Long ago, the first guardian, the warrior Illyra loved, poured his soul into the light of the heart tree before he died. Not his body, but his essence, his strength, his choice to protect her. That light needed time to grow. So the tree sent it far, beyond stars, into the bloodline of distant humans. And now, the light had returned. In John. Back to the tree. John opened his eyes. His body was glowing now, not with borrowed power, but with something alive inside him. His veins pulsed like lightning. His eyes burned gold. The room reacted to him. The walls rose higher. The air changed shape. Illyra stepped back, eyes wide. "You've become him." "No," John said. His voice echoed, layered like two people speaking at once. "I've become me." Suddenly, the light inside the chamber shifted and focused on something in the far wall. A weapon began to rise. Not a sword, not a gun, but something alive. It was a staff of pure energy wrapped in glowing vines. At its top sat a single white crystal, pulsing like a heartbeat. John touched it, and it responded instantly. The staff folded into his arm, like it was meant to be there all along. Illyra smiled through tears. The light root staff, it only responds to the true guardian. Before John could speak, the ground outside rumbled. The Titan had reached the valley. Kel's voice thundered from above. "You think a tree will save you. You think the past makes you strong." John stepped forward, eyes glowing. "No, but what I carry does." The heart tree pulsed with a deep hum, and a wave of golden energy blasted out from its base, sweeping across the valley. The Titan froze mid-step. Its body began to crack. Kel screamed, and for the first time, the shadow blinked. The last awakening. The heart tree pulsed. A wave of golden light rolled through the valley, lifting leaves, shaking roots, and silencing every dark whisper in the wind. The war-forged Titan stood still, its legs half sunk into the earth, its joints sparking, its chest cracked open. Kel stood atop the machine, his cloak torn, his armor burned, but his fury untouched. He raised his hand, and the shadows around him formed wings, lifting him from the Titan's shoulders. He flew down toward the glowing valley with one purpose: destroy John, destroy the heart tree, destroy the light. But something had changed. John no longer looked like a lost explorer. He stood tall, calm, glowing, not from outside, but from within. The light root staff in his hand was now part of him, wrapped into his skin like veins. The air around him shimmered like heat from a rising sun. The ground responded to his footsteps. The tree's light curved with his breath. Illyra stood behind him. She was silent. She didn't need to speak. She knew. The time had come. Kel landed with a crash, cracking stone beneath his boots. "Do you really think," he growled, "you can stop what's already begun?" John didn't answer. Kel laughed, loud, bitter, broken. "You're not a god. You're a copy, a shadow of a man who once stood for something. But he failed. He sealed her because he was too weak to save her." John's voice was calm, steady. He didn't seal her because he failed. He sealed her because he loved her. He gave his life so she could survive. Kel roared, rushing forward. Blades of shadow formed in his hands. He struck. John moved like light. Every hit Kel threw, John blocked with the staff. Sparks flew. Wind howled. The valley shook. But this time, it wasn't a battle of power. It was a battle of purpose. Kel struck again and again, until finally, John caught his blade midair with his bare hand. The blade hissed and melted into smoke. Cale staggered back. What? What are you? John stepped forward. I am not your past, he said. I am not your mistake. I am the choice he made. Reborn. I am the last light. And this is where it ends. John raised the lightroot staff. The heart tree responded. Its roots rose from the valley floor, wrapping around John like armor. Branches circled the sky, forming a crown of stars. A blinding beam of light shot from the top of the tree into the heavens, cutting through the red clouds. Elira watched, tears in her eyes. She could feel it. The final awakening. The heart tree wasn't just a source of power. It was a being. A consciousness. A guardian asleep since the First War. And John was its voice. Cale screamed, his body breaking apart, unable to hold his shape against the light. Shadows peeled off him, revealing something underneath, a twisted version of the man he once was. Young, human, scared. You don't have to end like this, John said softly. Cale looked at his own hands, shaking. It's too late. John reached out. Not if you choose now. Cale stared for a long moment. Then, he dropped his sword. The shadows around him vanished. He fell to his knees, not defeated, but freed. And then, his body dissolved into soft smoke, caught by the light. A whisper passed through the air. Thank you. Silence returned to the valley. John looked at Elira. She stepped forward, slowly, like she was afraid to breathe. It's done. John nodded. No, not yet. He turned back to the heart tree. It was glowing brighter than ever before, almost too bright. I understand now, John said, why he sealed you, why he never returned. Elira looked confused. What do you mean? The light inside me, John said. It's not just power. It's memory. It's connection. I'm not just carrying his soul. I'm the lock. The last key. The curse is broken, yes, but the darkness will come back. Again. One day. He turned toward her. I can stop it forever. But I have to stay. I have to become part of the tree. Elira's eyes filled with tears. No, not again. I won't lose you again. John smiled. You won't, because this time, I'm not dying. I'm becoming. He stepped back, lifting the staff high. Golden light wrapped around his body. The roots lifted him gently into the tree's heart. As he rose, he spoke his last words. When the world forgets the light, I will awaken again, and I will remember you. Elira fell to her knees, crying. The tree closed. The valley turned silent again, not with sadness, but with peace. Years later, a new child walks through the valley. A little girl with curious eyes and wild hair. She stops at the heart tree. Inside the glowing crystal trunk, two figures rest. One of light, one of nature. They are not sleeping. They are watching. The girl whispers, Mom, Dad. The tree glows gently. And far above the sky, a single star shines brighter than all the others.